Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are going to do something a little bit dangerous.
Oh, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, we are going to take the timeline of human history. The one you have in your head, the one with the nice, neat, straight line from cavemen all the way to skyscrapers, and we are going to break it.
We aren't just breaking it. I mean, we're effectively taking the standard ruler of history and just snapping it right in half.
I really love when we do that. But before we get to the wreckage, let's establish exactly what it is we're breaking.
Right, the baseline.
Exactly. So the standard story, the one we all got in grade school, it goes pretty much like this. We started as hunter-gatherers, right? Just banging rocks together. Primitive, simple.
Living in caves, chasing mammoths.
Right. And then, slowly, over thousands and thousands of years, we figured out farming. Then we got pottery, then bronze, then iron, then steam engines, and finally, boom, we have iPhones and deep dives into history. It's a straight lineup.
A nice, comfortable 45-degree angle of pure progress.
Yeah. It's what they call the linear model.
That is the linear model of history, and it is very, very seductive. It's comfortable because it puts us, modern humans, at the absolute top of the pyramid.
We're the winners.
Exactly. It suggests that we are the apex, the smartest, most advanced people to ever walk the earth. It's a form of what you might call temporal chauvinism, really.
Temporal chauvinism. I like that term.
Yeah, we just assume that because we are the latest, we inherently must be the greatest.
And it feels good to be the winner. But the source material we are diving into today, it really challenges that fundamental assumption.
Deeply challenges it.
We're looking at a stack of research centered around a conversation with Jay Anderson. He's the founder of a group called Project Unity. And his whole thing, his mission, is investigating the anomalies.
The things that don't fit the nice, neat graph.
Right. The things that mainstream history just kind of, sweeps under the rug because it completely messes up the timeline.
Anderson is an incredibly interesting figure to study because he bridges two very different worlds. He talks a lot about the symbiosis between spirit and science, which, can get a little metaphysical for some people.
Sure.
But for this specific deep dive, for what we're doing today, we are focusing squarely on his hard evidence.
Yeah, we aren't just talking about myths or legends here, guys. We're talking about the stuff you can literally touch. The stone, the metal.
Sure, the physical engineering that physically should not exist when it does.
We're navigating what we call the lost chapters of history.
Mm-hmm.
And the premise here is simple, but kind of terrifying when you really think about it.
Mm-hmm.
The further back in time you go in certain specific places, the engineering actually gets better, not worse.
Which is the exact opposite of what that linear model predicts.
Exactly. Think about it. If I go back to the Model T Ford, it's way worse than a modern Tesla. If I go back to the Wright brothers, their little canvas plane is incredibly clunky compared to, like, an F-35 fighter jet. But in the ancient world, we see these massive, precision-engineered structures, and then the stuff built on top of them by later cultures closer to us in time, is sloppy. It's completely inferior.
It implies a peak of civilization that was reached and then somehow lost, a golden age followed by a massive reset.
So we had a lot of ground to cover. We've got impossible computers found in shipwrecks. We've got stones that weigh 1,000 tons, which, by the way, we still struggle to move today. And we've got a really compelling theory about a cataclysm that essentially wiped humanity's memory.
Anderson often refers to us as a species with amnesia. We've forgotten who we were, and we're wandering around the ruins of our own house, looking at the foundation and wondering who built the place.
It's wild. Let's start with the impossible artifacts. The source material highlights one that always blows my mind because it's so incredibly mechanical. It feels so modern. The Antikythera mechanism.
The Antikythera mechanism. It really is the smoking gun for the argument that we are missing a huge piece of the puzzle here. It just completely destroys the idea that technology is strictly a linear progression.
For those listening who haven't seen a picture of this thing, describe what we're looking at, because the story of its discovery is crazy. It was found by sponge divers way back in 1901, right?
Correct. Off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera, they were diving in a shipwreck that's been dated to about 60 or 70 BC. And to the untrained eye, when they first pulled it up onto the boat, it just looked like a heavily corroded green lump of rock. Or maybe slag metal.
Didn't look like a machine.
Not at all. It
Yeah.
sat in a museum for years before anyone really understood what it was. People just thought it was junk from the wreck. But when they finally started analyzing it, and eventually when they x-rayed it with modern gamma ray imaging technology, they realized it wasn't a rock. It was a highly sophisticated machine.
And not just a simple machine. We aren't talking about a basic lever or a pulley system here.
Oh no. It contained a complex system of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, and they were meticulously crafted. But the specific detail that Jay Anderson points out, and this is absolutely crucial for the engineering nerds listening, is that it features what's called differential gearing.
Differential gearing.
Yeah.
Okay, break that down for us. Why is that specific term so important?
Well, think about your car. When you turn a corner, the outer wheel has to travel a slightly longer distance than the inner wheel, right?
Right.
So those two wheels need to be able to spin at different speeds, even though they're powered by the same engine. A differential gear allows for exactly that. In the Antikythera mechanism, this specific type of gearing allowed the device to calculate the movements of the sun and the moon simultaneously.
Because they have different orbital periods.
Exactly. It tracked them independently, but within the same system. The massive problem for mainstream history is that differential gearing wasn't invented, and I'm using heavy air quotes there, until European clockmakers supposedly developed it in the 16th century.
So we have a physical device from ancient Greece, thousands of years prior to the 16th century, using technology that supposedly wouldn't exist again for another 1,500 years.
Exactly. It's essentially an analog computer. It was designed to track the solar system, it could predict eclipses using the Saros cycle, and it even tracked the dates of the Panhellenic Games like the Olympics. It literally packed the mathematical knowledge of the cosmos into a wooden box about the size of a mantle clock.
That is insane.
But here is where it gets really strange, and Anderson makes a phenomenal point here. There is absolutely no developmental trail for this object.
Right. This is the Model T problem again. Usually when you look at history, you see the failures first.
Exactly. Technology evolves through trial and error. You find the clunky, barely working prototype. Then maybe a century later, you find the slightly better version. Then you find the refined version.
A clear lineage.
Yes. But with the Antikythera mechanism, there are no clunky earlier versions found anywhere in the archaeological record. None. It just appears out of nowhere as a fully formed, incredibly precise piece of high technology.
It's like digging in a medieval castle and finding a 1990s laptop. But there are no typewriters and no abacuses anywhere nearby. It just flat out shouldn't be there.
That's a really fair analogy. It strongly suggests that the Greeks didn't just casually stumble upon this invention. Anderson speculates that this implies one of two things. Either there was a secret program within the Greek or Roman empires, like a black budget research lab where a tiny, isolated group of geniuses were thousands of years ahead of the general population.
Which is a very cool idea, like at ancient skunk works or DARPA.
It is cool, but the more likely scenario, at least according to the diffusionist theory that Anderson supports, is that this technology was a holdover, a remnant of knowledge that was already incredibly old when the Greeks had it.
So they didn't invent it at all, they just preserved it. Or maybe copied it from something much, much older.
Exactly. Anderson notes that the precision of the gearing simply doesn't match the general culture and industrial capacity of the time. The Greeks were brilliant, they were great philosophers, incredible geometers, but this is a massive leap in metallurgy and precision engineering that stands completely alone.
Yeah, if they had this level of tech, why didn't they use it for other things?
Precisely. Why not use it for water pumps? For industrial mills, for complex weaponry? Why only this one highly specific luxury calculator?
It's a true anomaly. It implies they had the final object, but not the industrial base that usually creates the object.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's metal. Let's talk about stone. Because if the Antikythera mechanism is a headache for historians, this next place is a full-blown migraine. Göbekli Tepe.
Göbekli Tepe is the history breaker. There's really no other way to describe it. It's located in modern-day Turkey, and the dating is the primary issue here. It is approximately 11,500 to 12,000 years old.
Okay, we need to contextualize that date for everyone listening. 12,000 years ago. What are human beings supposed to be doing at that time?
According to the standard model of history, we are deep in the pre-pottery Neolithic age. We are strictly hunter-gatherers. We live in small nomadic bands. We sleep in deer-hide tents.
Basic survival mode.
Exactly. We forage for berries. We hunt gazelles with flint spears. We do not have agriculture. We do not have established permanent cities. And we certainly do not have the logistical capacity for large-scale monumental stone construction.
And yet they build built Göbekli Tepe.
Which is definitely not a deer-hide tent. It is a massive, sprawling complex of megalithic stone circles. We are talking about giant T-shaped pillars, some of them weighing up to 20 tons, and they are beautifully carved with three-dimensional reliefs of animals: scorpions, lions, vultures, boars.
I want to pause on the 3D carving part because people might gloss over the significance of that. That means you aren't just taking a rock and scratching a picture of a lion into it. You are meticulously carving away the solid rock all around the image to make the lion physically pop out from the surface.
High relief.
That takes serious planning, insane artistic skill, and a lot of time.
And it takes specialized tools. But again, according to the timeline, these people supposedly only had flint. Have you ever tried to carve solid limestone with a piece of flint?
I haven't, but I imagine it doesn't go well.
It is incredibly difficult to achieve that level of smooth relief and artistic precision without metal. But honestly, the bigger issue isn't just the carving, it's the organization. To quarry these 20-ton stones, move them, and erect them into perfect circles requires a workforce of hundreds, maybe thousands of people working in coordination.
And hunter-gatherer bands don't have workforces. They have families. They cannot support a standing army of stonemasons.
Precisely. You need a massive food surplus to feed a dedicated workforce that isn't out hunting all day. To get a food surplus, you need agriculture. The standard theory in archaeology was always this very rigid sequence. Agriculture comes first. That leads to a food surplus, which leads to permanent cities, which leads to specialized labor, which finally leads to religion and complex temples.
But Göbekli Tepe flips that completely upside down.
It completely reverses the cause and effect of civilization. Göbekli Tepe suggests the megalithic temple came before the city and before the agriculture.
It's like finding a massive Gothic cathedral built by people who shouldn't even know how to stack two bricks together. It's absurd. But Anderson mentioned something really bizarre about Göbekli Tepe's fate, too. It wasn't destroyed in a war. It wasn't knocked over by an earthquake.
It was buried.
Purposefully buried.
Yes. The geological analysis of the soil covering the site shows it was rush buried. Someone, or some large group of people, decided to take this massive, beautiful cathedral of stone and completely cover it with rubble, refuse, and dirt.
And not just a little bit of dirt. Mountains of it.
Exactly. It likely took as much physical effort and coordination to bury the site as it did to build it in the first place.
Why? I mean, that is the ultimate question. Why spend generations building something that magnificent only to spend immense effort burying it?
That is the great mystery of Göbekli Tepe. Anderson speculates on a few motives. Were they hiding it? Were they preserving it intentionally? Were they trying to protect it from a coming cataclysm they knew was approaching?
Or maybe the culture just changed.
Right. Maybe they underwent a huge ideological shift and decided to literally close the book on that era of their history. We simply don't know. But because they buried it so thoroughly, it was perfectly preserved from erosion and vandalism. It's a pristine time capsule.
And it definitively proves that 12,000 years ago, people weren't just picking berries in the woods. They were engineers.
Highly advanced engineers. And this leads us directly into the broader pattern that Anderson discusses. Because this isn't just an isolated anomaly in Turkey, this is a global phenomenon.
This is what we call the megalithic mystery. It's this wild idea that you can go to Egypt, Peru, Malta, Japan, all over the globe, and you see the exact same anomalous construction techniques.
And you see the exact same chronological anomaly. The oldest stuff is the biggest, the heaviest, and the most precise.
Let's go to Peru for a minute, because Anderson seems to have a lot of personal on-the-ground experience there. He talks specifically about sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo.
Peru is perhaps the most visual, undeniable example of this architectural stratification. You have these ancient sites high up in the Andes Mountains, and the foundational walls are made of these massive, multi-ton blocks of solid stone, mostly granite and andesite.
And the fit between these stones is what everyone always talks about.
The marshmallow effect. That is exactly how Anderson describes it when you see it up close. It looks as if the stones were made of marshmallows, squished together so they deformed to fit each other perfectly, and then magically hardened back into granite.
It's not just standard bricklaying.
No, the joinery is mind-bogglingly complex. They aren't just square blocks stacked in rows, they are polygonal. You'll see one massive stone that has, say, 12 different distinct angles carved into it, and the stone right next to it is carved with the exact inverse of those 12 angles to match it perfectly.
And there is zero mortar.
No mortar whatsoever. You literally cannot fit a human hair or a razor blade between these massive stones, and they are interlocked in three-dimensional space going deep into the wall. Because of this, they are entirely earthquake-proof. When a massive earthquake hits, and Peru is very seismically active, the stones literally dance.
They
Yeah, they
dance.
move, they rattle around riding the seismic wave, and then because of their complex geometric cuts, they just settle right back into their original perfect positions. It is brilliant, genius-level engineering.
Meanwhile, what does the mainstream historical narrative say? Who gets the credit for building these walls?
The mainstream strongly attributes all of this construction to the Incas. Now, let's be clear, the Incas were a fantastic, vibrant civilization. They were great organizers, phenomenal at terrace agriculture, and made incredible textiles. But technologically speaking, they were a Bronze Age civilization. Their cutting tools were made of copper and bronze.
And here's where we need to talk about the Mohs scale. Anderson brings this up to inject some actual hard science into the architectural debate.
Right. The Mohs scale is how geologists measure mineral hardness. It's a scale from 1 to 10. Diamond is at the very top, a 10. Copper and bronze tools, the kind the Incas had, sit way down around a 3.5 or a 4.
Okay, keep that in mind.
The stones used at Sacsayhuaman are granite and andesite. On the Mohs scale, those stones sit at a 6.5 or a 7.
So just applying basic high school physics here,
Yeah.
you cannot cut a material with a tool that is softer than the material itself.
Exactly. If you take a copper chisel and try to carve a block of solid granite, the chisel just dulls, deforms, and breaks. The granite wins every single time.
So how do historians explain it?
They argue that the builders used pounders, basically just harder river stones, to bash away at the granite for decades. You can certainly pound rock with other rock, but to achieve that level of polished, glass-smooth, 12-angle puzzle piece precision, it is incredibly unlikely, if not flat-out impossible, using just a primitive pounding tool kit. You would need thousands of years to finish a single retaining wall.
And then there's the Jenga effect. This was a detail from Anderson's research that really stuck with me. You look at these massive invincible walls, and parts of them have been completely obliterated.
Yes. Anderson describes what it's like walking through these sites. You see 40-ton blocks of finely cut granite completely ripped from the walls and thrown across the hillside like they were made of styrofoam, just casually tossed into the valley.
And what's right next to them?
Right next to these obliterated megaliths, you see these very simple, primitive structures made of mud, adobe clay, and small, rough field stones. These are the structures that are definitively Incan, and they are perfectly pristine.
So wait, let's get this straight. The massive, earthquake-proof, invincible granite fortress is destroyed and scattered, but the little mud hut right next to it is totally fine.
It creates a massive, glaring logical problem for the mainstream timeline. The narrative says the Spanish conquistadors came in and destroyed the Incan sites. But if that's true, why would the Spanish spend weeks or months trying to dismantle an indestructible granite wall, which they didn't even have the explosive technology to blow up back then, but leave the fragile mud huts standing right next to it?
It makes absolutely no sense. It defies logic.
It does. It points to a completely different conclusion. The granite walls were built first thousands of years earlier by an unknown culture. Then a massive geological cataclysm occurred. An earthquake of biblical proportions, a massive flood, something with the kinetic energy required to toss 40-ton stones. That event destroyed the megalithic civilization.
And then thousands of years pass.
The Incas eventually arrive in the region. They find these mind-blowing ruins. They look at them and say, this land is sacred. The gods must have built this. And so they build their own structures, the mud and adobe huts in and around the ruins to venerate them.
Which is exactly what the Incas said.
Exactly. It's what the Incas themselves explicitly told the Spanish. They had a specific word for the older world, Hanan Pacha. They openly claimed they didn't build the big megalithic walls they said the ancient gods did. We just arrogantly chose not to believe them.
That sequence of events makes way more sense. It perfectly explains the massive difference in technology levels and the difference in the damage patterns. Now, we really can't talk about ancient heavy lifting without going to Lebanon, to Baalbek.
Baalbek is the absolute heavyweight champion of the ancient world. If you think the stones in Peru are impressively big, wait until you look at the foundations of the Temple of Jupiter.
Standard history says the Romans built this entire complex in the 1st century AD.
Correct. And to be fair, the Romans certainly did build a spectacular temple there. You go there today, and you can clearly see Roman columns, Roman aesthetics, Roman statues. But the foundation, the massive stone platform that the Roman temple is sitting on, That tells a very different story.
We're talking about the trilithon.
The trilithon. It's a row of 3 truly massive limestone blocks built into the retaining wall. Each one of those 3 single blocks weighs between 800 and 1,000 tons.
1,000 tons. I'm really trying to picture the sheer scale of that. A modern Boeing 747 airplane weighs maybe 200 tons when it's fully loaded with fuel and passengers. So we are talking about lifting the equivalent of 5 jumbo jets compressed into a single block of solid stone.
And not just dragging them, lifting them 20 or 30 feet up into the air to place them perfectly level into a foundational wall.
Could the Romans actually do that?
Anderson points out a very specific, verifiable historical record that makes that highly dubious. The Romans were excellent, meticulous record keepers. They constantly bragged about their engineering feats. In the 3rd century, which is hundreds of years after Baalbek was supposedly built, the Romans moved the Lateran obelisk from Egypt to Rome.
Okay, setting the benchmark.
Right. They wrote about moving this obelisk extensively because it was the single heaviest object they had ever successfully moved. It was a monumental achievement for them, their version of the Apollo moon landing. That obelisk weighed approximately 450 tons.
Okay, so their absolute record-breaking push-to-the-limit lift was 450 tons.
And to do it, they had to use massive, specialized wooden cranes, complex capstan systems, and thousands of men and beasts of burden pulling simultaneously. It pushed the absolute physical limits of wood and rope technology. Contemporary accounts describe thick ropes snapping under the tension, the ground physically shaking. It was a massive struggle.
Yet we are expected to blindly believe that 2 centuries earlier, they casually lifted blocks that weighed 1,000 tons at Baalbek, more than double their recorded maximum.
And they did it without writing a single word about it, without explaining the specialized machinery they would have needed. It completely contradicts their own documented technological ceiling. It's exactly like saying the United States successfully went to Mars in the 1920s but just forgot to write it down, and then openly struggled to get to the moon in the 1960s.
It's totally illogical.
Yeah.
And there's a quarry near Baalbek that adds to the mystery, right?
Yes, just a short distance away in the limestone quarry, there is a stone still partially attached to the bedrock. Locals call it the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. And another, even larger block was discovered more recently buried nearby. These uncut blocks weigh upwards of 1,200 to 1,650 tons.
1,600 tons. And it looks like they were in the middle of cutting them out of the earth, and then they just stopped.
Abruptly. Just like Göbekli Tepe was suddenly buried. Just like the polygonal walls in Peru were abruptly smashed. It implies a sudden global stop, a specific moment in time where the work simply couldn't continue.
So we have the engineering anomalies, what you'd call the hard science, the heavy lifting, the stone cutting. But Anderson pivots in the conversation to something completely different, the soft science. Or maybe, more accurately, the lost science, the science of sound.
This is where the source material moves from the purely physical engineering into the psychoacoustic realm. Anderson refers to this concept as the architecture of consciousness.
Which I admit sounds very mystical and New Agey at first, but he actually backs it up with hard data. The core idea is that these ancient temples weren't just static forts or basic tombs, they were active machines.
Machines for the mind. If you look at the Hypogeum in Malta, it serves as a perfect, verifiable example of this. It's a massive, multi-level underground complex, painstakingly carved out of solid limestone bedrock. Again, mainstream archaeology attributes this massive excavation to primitive people using, I kid you not, deer antlers and animal bones as their primary tools.
Which, come on, we talked about Flint earlier. Carving a multi-level subterranean city with deer antlers.
It is a massive stretch of the imagination, but honestly, the tool debate isn't even the most fascinating part. The acoustics are the real anomaly here. Deep inside the complex, there is a specific room called the Oracle Chamber, and acoustic engineers have tested it. It has been perfectly engineered to resonate at a very specific frequency, 110 hertz.
110 hertz. Now, why is that specific number so special? Is it just a random deep hum that happens to sound spooky underground?
Not at all. Modern neuroscience actually tells us that 110 hertz is a highly significant acoustic frequency for the human brain. When a human subject is exposed to sustained sound at that exact frequency, especially through low vocal chanting or resonance in an enclosed stone space brain, activity demonstrably shifts.
In what way?
It physically dampens the activity in the left hemisphere of the prefrontal cortex, which is the language center, the logical, analytical, ego-driven side of the brain. At the same time, it highly stimulates the right hemisphere, the creative, emotional, deeply intuitive side.
So it literally switches your brain into a meditative or altered state.
Exactly. It fundamentally alters your state of consciousness. Anderson's central argument here is that the ancient builders didn't just accidentally stumble upon this perfect acoustic resonance. They knew exactly what they were doing. They possessed a scientific package of knowledge regarding how specific sound waves interact with human neurobiology, and they purposefully built their architecture to exploit that.
They were essentially tuning the building so the building could tune the human mind.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
So you walk into the hypogeum, you start a low chant, the geometric shape of the room amplifies that tone to exactly 110 hertz, and boom, you are instantly dropped into a deep trance state. You feel like you're connecting with the divine.
It is a technology. It's just not a technology made of microchips, wires, and glowing screens that we are used to. It's a technology made of solid stone and perfect acoustic geometry. It's spiritual technology.
And that deeply ties into Anderson's overarching theories about the two paths of civilization. We'll definitely get into that more in the outro. But it's this fascinating idea that they simply chose a completely different tech tree than we did.
But the massive question still remains hanging over all of this. Where did they go? If they were so incredibly advanced, if they could effortlessly move 1,000 tons of solid rock and engineer human consciousness through architecture, why are they entirely gone?
And this brings us right to the catastrophic part of the deep dive. Section 4, the cataclysm, specifically the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
This is really the hinge point of all alternative human history. The Younger Dryas is a thoroughly documented geological period that began roughly 12,800 years ago.
So what exactly happened 12,800 years ago?
The world basically fell apart. We know this with certainty from taking deep ice core samples in Greenland and looking at global geological data. The climate went completely chaotic. We had a sudden, massive spike in global warming, which was almost immediately followed by a plunging, sudden deep freeze. But the most devastating factor wasn't the temperature. It was the water.
The sea levels.
Massive, catastrophic, rapid sea level rise. Geologists call it meltwater pulse 1b. The massive ice caps that covered North America and Europe melted at an unprecedented rate. The world's oceans rose by hundreds of feet in a terrifyingly short amount of time.
Okay, so put yourself in the shoes of an advanced civilization. Where do you build your major cities?
You build them on the coast. You build them near the major river deltas. Because of trade, agriculture, travel, you live exactly where the water is going to hit the hardest.
So the working theory is this. The advanced megalithic civilization was primarily maritime. They were a global coastal culture. And when the Younger Dryas cataclysm hit, they were simply drowned.
Wiped completely off the map in a geological blink of an eye. Their massive port cities, their universities, their libraries, all swallowed and buried under 400 feet of churning ocean water.
And this date, the 12,800 years ago marker, this isn't just some random number pulled out of thin air to fit the theory.
No, not at all. And this is one of those distinct shivers down the spine moments when you're looking at the data. That exact geological date lines up almost perfectly with Plato.
Plato and the story of Atlantis.
Right. Mainstream academia entirely dismisses Atlantis as just a neat little philosophical fairy tale, an allegory. But Plato was remarkably specific in his writing. He didn't just say once upon a time in a magical land. He gave a hard historical date. He explicitly wrote that Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years before the time of the Greek lawmaker Solon.
Okay, let's do the math on that. Solon lived around 600 BC.
Exactly. So if you do the basic math, 9,000 years plus the 600 years to get to BC, plus the 2,000 years to get to our present day, that puts the destruction of Atlantis at exactly 11,600 to 12,000 years ago.
It was exactly the window when the massive Younger Dryas meltwater pulses were reshaping the coastlines of the Earth.
It perfectly matches the hard scientific record of catastrophic sea level rise. It is way too precise of a coincidence to just casually ignore.
So humanity essentially hits a massive global reset button. The highly advanced coastal people get completely wiped out. So who is left? Who survives the flood?
The people who are already living high up in the mountains, the nomadic hunter-gatherers, the disconnected people who didn't rely on the complex, fragile infrastructure of the advanced coastal cities.
And this is where Anderson brings in what he calls the Sentinel Island analogy, which I think is absolutely brilliant for visualizing this.
It really clarifies the whole concept. Right now, today, in the 21st century, we have uncontacted, primitive tribes. The Sentinelese people living on North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean, they literally live in the Stone Age. They have absolutely no idea what an iPhone is. They don't know what a combustion engine is or what a plane is, really.
But we exist simultaneously with them. We are flying supersonic jets miles over their heads while they are hunting with spears.
Exactly. So you have a highly advanced, spacefaring Type 1 civilization, us, and a primitive hunter-gatherer civilization, them, living on the exact same planet at the exact same time.
So imagine a global catastrophe hits us tomorrow. A massive asteroid impact, a Carrington-level solar flare, whatever it might be. Our entire electrical grid goes down instantly. Our global supply chains completely break. The megacities starve within weeks. We, the supposedly advanced people, are actually the most vulnerable system on the planet. We die out.
But the Sentinelese, they wouldn't even notice the grid went down. They already know how to fish, they know how to hunt and forage, they survive the apocalypse because they don't need the grid.
Then, fast forward 5,000 years. Their descendants eventually leave the island and populate the Earth. They pass down oral traditions and myths about ancient gods who used to fly across the sky in metal birds, which was us, but they have absolutely no idea how to build those planes.
And if they eventually dig up the buried ruins of New York City, they might look at the massive rusted steel beams and the concrete foundations and say, the gods built this. We primitive people couldn't possibly lift that.
It fits the ancient pattern perfectly.
It completely explains why we see evidence of incredibly high technology and primitive stone tool technology existing side by side in the ancient archaeological record. They weren't sequential, they were coexisting.
It's a really sobering thought experiment. We walk around thinking we're invincible because we have Wi-Fi, but we're actually the fragile ones in the ecosystem.
Extreme complexity breeds extreme fragility. The ancients were likely much more resilient in some ways, but the sheer overwhelming scale of the Younger Dryas event, which many scientists now believe may have been triggered by a fragmented comet impact in North America, was just too much for any civilization to withstand fully.
Now, Anderson doesn't just stop at analyzing ancient history. He takes this concept of hidden knowledge and lost physics and connects it directly to the modern day, and specifically the modern UFO phenomenon.
This is where his perspective is really unique, because Anderson's original background is actually deep in UFO research. He sees a direct, undeniable bridge between the two seemingly unrelated topics.
The hidden knowledge link.
Right. If there actually was a lost, highly advanced civilization, and if they utilized a completely different type of physics and technology, focusing on acoustics, natural magnetism, manipulating consciousness, maybe some tiny fraction of that knowledge survived the cataclysm. Maybe what we currently perceive as inexplicable UFOs or aerial anomalies isn't necessarily little green men visiting from Zeta Reticuli.
Maybe it's us. Or a hidden remnant of us.
Or perhaps it's simply a different path of technological evolution that we're only just beginning to rediscover through quantum physics. Anderson frequently talks about the two paths. We, modern humans, chose the path of fire, the path of explosion, combustion. We blow up dead dinosaurs inside an engine block just to drive to the grocery store. We split the atom violently to make world-ending bombs. It's a very external, very forceful, very violent industrial approach to physics.
And the ancient civilization.
They might have chosen the path of resonance, harmony, frequency, natural magnetism, working symbiotically with nature's underlying energetic forces rather than trying to explosively dominate them.
Which completely explains why their surviving machines look like beautifully carved stone temples, and our machines look like loud, dirty engines.
Precisely. But Anderson is also surprisingly skeptical of the modern mainstream narrative building around UFOs. He strongly warns his audience about controlled opposition.
Yeah, he specifically mentions the cult-like behavior forming in the modern UFO disclosure community. This idea that you're either completely on the team buying the government narrative or you're the enemy.
He's become very disillusioned with the official government disclosure movement. He feels like it's a carefully managed breadcrumb trail that's ultimately designed to lead nowhere or just justify more defense spending. But he shares a truly fascinating, unsettling anecdote about an interview he personally conducted with Admiral Bobby Ray Inman.
Now, for context, this is a serious heavy hitter. Admiral Inman is the former head of the NSA and served high up in the CIA.
A man who absolutely knows where all of the intelligence bodies are buried. Anderson bluntly asked him about the existence of extraterrestrial life. And Inman gave a very strange, very carefully worded, specific answer.
He said, and I quote, "I have a high level of confidence that there is no other living life in our galaxy."
Living life, it's a totally redundant phrase. If something is life, it's generally understood to be living. Why specify living? Why not just say there is no other life?
Anderson speculates pretty heavily on this. Does the modifier living imply biological?
That is the direct implication. If he confidently asserts there is no living biological life out there, maybe he knows there is artificial life. Maybe there are ancient AI probes, self-replicating von Neumann machines surveying the solar system, the automated technological remnants of long-dead civilizations.
Or maybe interdimensional beings that just don't fit our standard biological definition of living, carbon-based organisms? It's a classic lawyer's answer. It technically, legally answers the specific question asked while completely hiding the massive underlying truth.
Exactly. It deliberately leaves the door wide open for phenomena that are demonstrably real but simply not alive as we narrowly define biology.
And speaking of things that might not be alive but are definitely anomalous, Anderson brings up space anomalies toward the end. Things like microbes found inside meteorites.
He brings up the panspermia theory, the scientifically viable idea that the basic building blocks of life, or even dormant life itself, exists naturally in the deep vacuum of space. He mentions the ongoing academic controversy. Some mainstream scientists claim any organic material found in meteorites is just earthly contamination, while other astrobiologists swear they've found fossilized extraterrestrial structures in these rocks.
And we can't ignore Buzz Aldrin's comments.
Yeah.
You really can't ignore the second man to walk on the moon.
No, you can't. Buzz Aldrin, sitting on national television, openly talking about the monolith on Phobos.
For those who don't know, Phobos is one of the moons of Mars. And Aldrin says there's a literal monolith sitting on it.
There is a very distinct, massive, tower-like geometric structure sitting upright on that tiny potato-shaped moon. Aldrin famously said in that interview, when people find out about this, they're going to ask, who put that there?
Who put that there? The phrasing inherently implies it is not a natural geological formation.
Again, it all feeds back into this central idea that our solar system and the true timeline of our own human history is much, much more crowded and complex than we are currently told in textbooks. Whether it's ancient, advanced humans who somehow made it to Mars before the cataclysm, or non-human visitors who left a marker behind, the physical anomalies are simply there, waiting to be explained.
So, bringing this all together, what does this all fundamentally mean for us? We've covered impossible bronze gears in ancient Greece, floating 1,000-ton rocks in Lebanon, buried megalithic temples in Turkey, and literal monoliths on the moons of Mars.
I think the biggest takeaway is that it means we need to be incredibly humble.
Humble? In what way?
Yes. We constantly look back at the deep past with incredible arrogance. We look at ancient ruins and think, oh, look at those poor primitive people struggling to stack rocks together to worship the sun. But all the physical evidence strongly suggests they were the masters of a profound science that we have completely forgotten.
We are the ones suffering from amnesia.
We are the traumatized survivors of a global reset, the Younger Dryas cataclysm. And exactly like individuals who survive a massive trauma, we as a species have hyper-focused purely on survival, on defense, on weaponry, on heavy industry. We built our modern civilization based almost entirely on a foundation of fear, scarcity, and control over nature.
Whereas the ancient, lost civilization might have had a global culture based on connection, resonance, and living in balance with those natural forces.
Perhaps. It is heavily speculative, of course, but their surviving architecture literally supports that idea. They built their structures utilizing sacred geometry and precision to last forever. We build our structures using cheap concrete and drywall for planned obsolescence.
It really brings us back full circle to that concept of cyclical time we touched on, the great year.
The ancient astronomical idea that human history is a massive repeating cycle, not a continuous straight line. We rise to great heights, we inevitably fall. The planet undergoes a violent shift and shakes us off like fleas, and then the survivors have to start all over again from the caves.
Anderson mentions that roughly every 12,000 years or so, the planet seems to undergo one of these major catastrophic shifts. And we are currently sitting roughly 12,000 years out from the last one.
Which is a very provocative, slightly terrifying thought to end a deep dive on. If that astronomical cycle holds true, we might be nearing the final pages of our current chapter of history.
Well, here is my final thought, my little thought experiment for you, the listener, to chew on. Imagine it is 10,000 years from right now. Our modern high-tech civilization has been completely wiped out by a massive solar flare or a sudden pole shift. A new group of human survivors is slowly emerging from the ashes. They are exploring North America, and they find Mount Rushmore.
Which is carved out of solid granite, hardness level 7 on the Mohs scale.
Exactly. And then they explore further, and they find the massive foundation of the Hoover Dam, millions of tons of solid concrete. But they don't find our books.
Yeah.
They don't find our cloud servers or our hard drives. All of those fragile things have completely rotted away to dust. They don't find our gleaming glass skyscrapers because those shattered and collapsed thousands of years ago.
All they find is the stone.
All they find is the massive stone. And they are going to look up at those giant faces carved into the mountain, and they will ask themselves, who are the incredible giants who built this? And why did their perfect civilization fail?
And based on the sheer scale of the ruins, they will probably conclude that we were literal gods. And they will be just as fundamentally wrong about who we were as we likely are about the ancient megalithic builders.
That is really something to sit and chew on. Seriously, guys, do yourself a massive favor today. Open up your browser and just Google the Baalbek Trilithon and the Saxe-Human walls. Actually look at the high-resolution pictures of these stones. Seeing the visual evidence with your own eyes changes your perspective almost instantly.
It really does. Once you see the sheer scale and the precision, it immediately stops being just a fun internet theory and starts being a very real, physical problem that demands a logical answer.
Well said. Thanks for diving so incredibly deep with us today. We'll see you in the next cycle.
Take care, everyone.